Good afternoon, everybody. Sure. We're happy to see you all here today. Good afternoon. This is an event response meeting to talk about getting involved in research. And I'm Dr. Melanie Sens. I'm the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education. And our panelists today include, have one faculty representative from each of our three departments, Dr. Ben Colbert, Dr. Al Tang, and Dr. Dan McGuire, who is on today, another meeting. And so we just wanted to be here to share some information with you about how to get involved in research, what kinds of experiences and/or characteristics we look for in research assistants in our lab. And then we'll have time for questions, for you to ask us questions. So we're kind of informal here. We're just going to each talk a little bit about research opportunities and how to get involved. And then please step up and ask questions as you would like. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Colbert.
Do we want to go through the UNIT website?
Yeah, we might want to do that.
You
can. You probably more familiar than me.
So I'm going to start actually just with our School of Behavioral and Brain Sciences research. There's this page that says undergraduate research opportunities. So if you haven't explored this, you should. We have a little bit of information about applying to individual research labs, and I think that's going to be our focus today, but I don't want to ignore these programs down below. We have several externally funded programs that are associated with BBS. There's also other programs associated with natural sciences and mathematics and engineering that will actually pay you to do research. So don't ignore these opportunities. Take a look at them. So we have the NSF-REU, Culture, Responsive Research and Developmental Science. We've got the INSURE program, although it's no longer accepting new individuals. We have the T34 MARC program, which is specifically for first-year students going up into their second year. So if that is you, take a look at that program. We also have our summer surf program. So if it's coming February, you're like thinking about this coming summer, great opportunities there. And then there's also some information down at the bottom for the Office of Undergraduate Education. I want to highlight two, beyond these kind of individual programs here, I want to highlight two additional components. First is up here under research opportunities in individual BBS laboratories. Several years ago, some faculty members created what we call a research match portal. And we created this system because there were so many of you and so few of us, and it was taking a lot of effort on your part to send out, email after email after email to try to find opportunities. And similarly for us, it takes a lot of effort for us to respond to all of these inquiries when we may or may not even have openings in the lab. And so we created this research match portal. So again, to get to it, you can go to research, undergraduate research opportunities, or you can go directly to research portal. But on the undergraduate research page, you go to apply to research labs, and you get here. So who here has filled out the undergraduate research portal? Anybody? Okay, a couple folks. Okay, so those of you that haven't, if you're interested in undergraduate research, you should go check it out. Basically, in this portal, you create your own profile. You select laboratories that you're specifically interested in. You talk about what semesters you're available. Are you available to volunteer in the lab? Do you want to do it for credit? Do you want to get paid? What are you exactly looking for? What's your motivation for your research? What research questions you're interested in? And then what happens on my end as a faculty member is that I get a list and it says, these 50 people are all interested in my lab. So what I do now, I still respond to emails that I get directly, but I don't actually choose anybody if they email me directly. That's always for me through the research portal. So I can't say universally that all faculty are operating that way, but we're really trying to encourage student use and faculty use of this research portal to find opportunities. Okay. Beyond that, well, let me just ask, are there any questions about this portal? What it's for, what it does? Okay. I want to just put a plug in for a new program that was recently developed by one of our faculty, Selena Brody. It's called the Short-Term Working Group System. And this is research or research adjacent, but it's a really unique program where you get the opportunity to work, in a small group, so 10 to 15 students with a single or even a couple different faculty. You work over 4 sessions in a single semester on a very limited project. And the idea is that you get a little bit more of that kind of one-on-one mentoring that you would get in the research laboratory. And our goal is kind of trying to provide larger numbers of opportunities that exist within individual labs, just because there's not that much space. And so what Dr. Brody's developed, the short-term working group, is an opportunity to maybe get involved in research if you can't find a research laboratory. So take a look at it. Basically, each semester, there will be a list of the projects that are available. And when you apply, you can select kind of a top choice and a second choice of opportunities that you're interested in. And these are across campus. So it could be someone in economics and history and sociology, as well as psychology, speech language hearings, neuroscience, engineering. So you can, obviously, depending on your interest, you can pick the SWGs that you're interested in. You can apply as many as you want every semester. Applications for this fall are already done. We're currently doing the SWIGs right now, but applications will start either later this fall for the spring or early in the spring. And it's open to anybody who's interested. Okay. Anybody have any questions about kind of the digital sources here? They're available to find research opportunities. Okay. I think now we'll then come back to the camera.
All right. Thank you. So Dr. Culver is from Neuroscience, Dr. McGuire is from Speech Language and Hearing, and Dr. Tang is from Psychology. And each of them have very different types of labs. Some of us study humans, some of us study animals. I study infants, which are also humans. So labs differ in the types of activities that go on and the kinds of activities the students, of course, get involved in as well. So I will let each person just talk a little bit about their lab and some of the labs in your area, for example, whatever they choose to talk about.
Sure. So again, I'm Ben Culver. I'm associate professor in neuroscience. I work with undergrads a lot in my own research laboratory, and I also run one of these programs that I put up here called the Ensure program and the MARK program with a couple other of my faculty colleagues, Dr. Michael Burton, Dr. Anna Taylor. But I want to just focus in on my laboratory and similar laboratories, and I think kind of the research that we do in, broadly speaking, in kind of the neuroscience department. So we're more on the kind of animal, cell, in vitro end of brain research. We do have some faculty that do human research, but 90% or so of us are kind of doing more what we would call basic science, neuroscience research. So I myself, I'm a pain researcher. I'm really interested in understanding connections between chronic pain and psychiatric disease. Turns out a lot of people that have chronic pain also have what we call comorbidities or other kind of diseases or disorders. And a lot of those happen to be things like anxiety disorders and depressive like disorders. And so we're really interested in understanding those connections that happen in the brain. And by understanding the connections, we can potentially identify ways to treat that in humans. Now, we don't study in people. We used to do a little bit of work with non-pharmacological therapy, so exercise and meditation in human patients, but we haven't really done that since COVID. Right now, everything we do is either in cells or in mice. Okay? A little bit of rat work, but primarily we use mice, mice, rats, and humans. We all share a common ancestor, and because of that, we have biology that is overlapping, especially when you're thinking about a phenomenon such as pain. It's really important for all organisms, certainly mammals, to be able to respond to injury, avoid additional damage, and sometimes in both humans and other organisms that gets screwed up and it leads to chronic issues. So we're using mice to try to understand, again, this kind of connection between pain and kind of psychiatric disease. So I'm gonna stop there, kind of talk about my research. We'll come back to what I look at when I'm looking at undergrads.
All right, hi, I'm Annie McGuire. I'm an associate professor in speech language and hearing. I'm cross-listed in psychology. My research looks at how poverty and environment influence children's brain and language development. So we have a lab. The reason I was late and running, our lab is at Cal Dallas. So I don't know if you guys know, there's a couple of research centers that are also affiliated with the university. Did we say that? Okay, whatever. Okay, so some of those are down, since I was late. Some of those are down in the city. So my lab is actually in the Kellier Center in Dallas, which is basically on UT Southwestern's campus. There are some other research opportunities down there, which includes Center for Vital Longevity and Center for Brain Health. So one of the questions actually on the undergraduate portal is, would you be willing to travel to one of the centers? So students who work in my lab have to come down to Dallas and work in my lab. So we know that's an ask, so we usually schedule students for like one full day, right? They come down for the full day instead of like a couple hours at a time. So they'll work on ways to account for that. So a lot of our research is with humans, so ours is all with humans, and we study a lot of kids, and we usually study kids who are grade school age. So a lot of the students who are working in my lab, a lot of our work is in the summer. We're really, really busy in the summer, and we're busy on weekends, so we have a lot of weekend hours, and then we do some studies with college students as well. Generally, what we're looking at is how the brain processes language and how the environment might affect that. So we bring in families, ask the families lots of questions. We do lots of assessments with the kids to find out their language abilities, their learning abilities, all of that. And then we do a bunch of studies where we put electrode caps on their heads and look at how their brains are processing information. So that's my lab. We're at Kellier, so in speech language, just to give an overview, a lot of people are studying typical language like I am, or typical populations, but you also have people studying speech language disorders, autism, developmental language delay. There's a lot of researchers doing different areas of speech and language disorders and delays.
Hello, I'm Dr. Appletang. I'm an assistant professor in the psychology department, and the work in my lab looks at how children and adolescents develop socially and emotionally. So we look at things like how they process social information, how they process emotional information in the brain, and then whether the individual differences might be related to mental health issues like anxiety and depression. So currently we look at children, adolescents, and undergrads. So we do test some of these populations, and then the lab is currently at the Center for Vital Longevity. I'm using some of their space, but we will also move back up here. So some of the undergrads that work with me, they have to travel down there as well. So they're there for half a day, sometimes a full day. Yeah.
Yeah, so Dr. Calder pulled up this page, which is under our, it's a listing of research labs, and they're divided by departments. So you can actually scroll through and examine all the different labs, and they'll link to information about those particular neuroscience. So I would suggest that you do this before you complete the portal and get a sense of which types of research you're interested in being involved, what labs you'd be interested in involved, and then you can apply through the portal. So this is under, and you can also then search by faculty as well, but this is an easier way to go to the research labs tab under research.
And I'll point out, there's actually keywords over here. So if you're like, oh, I really want to study addiction and aging, you can click addiction and aging. Oh, actually, it's one at a time. You can do addiction or aging, okay? And you can find all the labs that are doing things related to aging or addiction.
So one of the things I'll point out is that as an undergraduate, many of your degree plans in BBS will allow you to get credit for participating in research labs. And so if you wanted to be involved in a research lab and get credit, you would register for directed research. You have to have already approval, get accepted into the lab, and have the approval of the faculty member to register for that. But you can take up to 3 hours of credit per semester. And the degree plans may vary a little bit in how many hours you can take for your degree plan. But that is an option. You can actually get credit toward your degree plan. Most labs want students to spend at least 2 semesters in the lab because it often takes a lot of time to train in the techniques that you're using. So it is a commitment that we're asking students to make over a longer term than 1 semester. Oftentimes students get into a lab and they stay for 2 or 3 years. Really get involved in research and end up authoring papers and complete honors thesis projects and things of that nature. So that's just a little bit about the mechanics of it. You can also volunteer. Many labs accept students who volunteer. So those are just some information about the mechanics you may have more questions about. Some of our advising staff are here. 3 members of our advising staff are back here. to introduce you to them, and they, they're the people that you'll talk to about registering for these kinds of classes as well as other classes. You can't go online and register. You have to go through and complete a form and go through them to register for these types of classes. And then I also want to mention or introduce Ms. Rachel Berglund. I forgot to mention her at the beginning. She organizes for us. She's one of our instructors for the first year seminar. And she's also the associate director for the Center for Children and Families. So she's been really involved in research in a lot of different ways. That's what we look for? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make a point about volunteering. So in neuroscience, there are some labs that still take volunteers, but even volunteers actually end up doing research for credit just at 0 credits. Okay, so if you are getting ready to volunteer and if everything's worked out and all of a sudden you get asked to do that, it's okay. 0 credit basically, kind of puts you on the books. It provides a little bit of liability coverage, frankly, if there's an accident in the laboratory or some other situation. So just if that happens to you, that's what's going on. Okay, that's our kind of our volunteer that. But I will say, I think in neuroscience, the majority of laboratories do prefer actually research for credit. And I want to mention, as long as you're full-time, and that's 13 credit hours? 12, yeah, thank you. As long as you're full-time at 12 credits, doing another credit of research for credit, or 2 or 3, doesn't cost you any money, okay? And it goes towards your degree, so that's great. And is there an upper level to that, or like 18, anything above 18 they gotta pay again, or is it free until?
No, it's anything over 12, there's no additional charge.
Great, yeah. Beautiful. So anything over 12, So, if you do have the opportunity to do research or credit, I would take that opportunity. Okay, sorry. So I just want to tell you a little bit about my philosophy when I'm thinking about students and evaluating students on the research portal and interviews and so I think one thing is I'm really looking for students that are interested in a long-term commitment to the lab. It takes a lot of effort to get people trained in the techniques that we do in my laboratory. So often for me, I'm looking for individuals that are first-year students and second-year students that maybe could go 2 years or more in the laboratory. I really want to, I don't want people that are just coming in real quick, put it on their CV and moving on. I want people to really learn what we're doing, learning the techniques, learning about the questions, to the point that at the end, I want my undergrads to be, basically operating as master's students or even PhD students. And I've had 3 students who have first author publications from my laboratory. It's very difficult to do, but it's possible. But these are all individuals that were there, 3 years, and we're working just as hard as some of my graduate students. When I'm getting, let's say, emails from students, so again, I don't actually take people that haven't gone through the research portal, but I still get emails from people. I will say, traditionally when it was all through emails, what would attract me to a student is a student that clearly has done their homework. If they just say, Dr. Fulber, I'm interested in pain research and I'd love an opportunity in your lab, it's just not enough. I mean, frankly, have you guys ever heard of something called a buyer's market? It's like a real estate term. This is a buyer's market, and that it's not great. I'll be honest with you, for you guys, but there's a lot of you and very few of us. And so what that means is that we have the opportunity to kind of expect a little bit more from people interested in lab. And so it's really, I think, important for you to do your homework. The best emails that I get are students that, say, all these descriptions about why they're interested in my laboratory. And then we'll say something like, I read your last paper and I have some questions about it. Can we get together to chat about it? They don't even say, is there a spot in your lab? Okay? They just say, can we get together and talk about your research? And it's really hard for me to say no to that. Right? I love talking about my research, and you're not actually asking anything from me. So, okay, great. And then you're in front of me, right? We're having a Teams meeting, or you're in my office, and we're chatting about my research, and you've got questions. And maybe I have a spot, maybe I don't. But now there's a connection there. And I think, probably 50% of my students, that's how it happened, right? Is I first met with them, and then it was the next semester, and I had a spot open, and it's like, oh yeah, that person, they went that extra distance. So, okay, I'm going to pass it on at this point.
Hi, okay, so talking about what we're looking for, I should also say, I didn't mention that I am also working with the Center for Children and Families. We are up here and we have a lot of other research opportunities through the Center for Children and Families as well. A lot of those you actually go out in the field, so you're out working in the community, doing research and getting experience that way. So that's another check mark on there. Would you be willing to like go into other neighborhoods and do things? That's another great way to get research experience. So what I'm looking for in lab, similar stuff. We usually want people at least 2 semesters. We also need people, like I said, with blocks of time. So one of the big things that gets students kind of eliminated is we say, what's your availability? And they say, oh, I have like 2 hours on a Sunday at midnight. And you know what I'm like, I can't, it's like we're open 9 to 5, Monday through Saturday. But if you don't have those times available, then it's just not a good fit. So some of it's just logistics. But mainly what we're looking for is a lot of the same things. People who are committed to coming down to our lab, people who can, usually the youngest, we're looking for juniors or earlier. So you have at least 2 semesters for the same reasons. The first semester, you are just learning things. The next semester, you're like doing things. And then after that, you're like really integrated in the research. And we have the same where we can get you on posters, on publications. You really understand it so that I think it takes at least 3 to 4 semesters before you would do a great job explaining to someone what the research is, why you're doing it, what the questions are, and really understand your variables. And that's what's going to get you into graduate school, right? So it benefits you to have that much time and not just like checking off like, I was in a lab. Like you have to be able to talk about it, and that takes time. We will sometimes, so I do the same thing. If students contact me, I send them through the portal. I think that's really important so we can keep information on it. I am looking for students who are interested in what I do, so that also I get lots of emails that are actually like, hey, I need research credit, can I work with you? And the same thing, I'm like, no, like, what I want to make sure, partially because that's what gives the commitment, like, I love the research I do, and when people love the research they're doing, they get excited about it and they come and they do it, and that's the type of student I want. So if you aren't interested in kids, you're not going to like the research, you're going to hate being there. If you're not interested in neuroscience and the ways I do, like cognitive neuroscience, you're not going to like being there, and that's not good for anybody. So I want to know that you like what I'm doing, because it'll make it way better for everybody involved. So that's part of that reason. It's a little ego, but for the most part, it's like I actually want you to enjoy it, right? Like that makes it better for everyone. So that's really important to what we're looking for. We actually sometimes, though, we have particular skills we're looking for. So because of the nature of some of my research, I really need people who are fluent Spanish speakers. That's really important. I don't get enough students applying to my lab who are fluent Spanish speakers. So we'll go to the portal and we can filter on our side by skills. And I will filter by Spanish speakers and sometimes reach out to anyone who has fluent speaking abilities or not above fluency, that's as high as it goes, but high levels of Spanish skills, and then we will reach out to them and ask them if they're interested, if they fall even within our framework. So some of those skills that you list on there might be things that faculty are looking for, so that's important to note as well. That's all else I said.
Yes, just to add to what Mandy is saying, the blocks of time that you put in is actually really important, especially if you're interested in working with a developmental psychologist who studies children like Melanie or Mandy or I, because the families, the kids come in after school. They're not going to come in during normal school hours. So if you have time blocks after school, you should put those in. Sometimes you have to be available on the weekends. And so people who get eliminated are people who don't put enough time blocks that are actually needed. I also think it's important that you have a horizon that is for longer term involvement, because you also have to think about what the supervisor will say about you, right? If you didn't have enough time to get to know them, for them to see how you work, and when they write you a reference letter, it'll be based on the little 2-3 months that they have known you, and I don't think that would be enough for some of you. Yeah, I think that's fair to say, but yeah.
Two more?
I just brought up my page just because I like to look at my own face. No, so there's, under the Research Match portals, it's actually embedded within a site called profiles.utdallas.edu. And Profiles has, you can search for any single faculty at UT in any school. So if you put in anybody's name, it'll pull up their profiles page. So this is a university-wide, all faculty page. But what's important about this is on everybody's page, there's these little tabs that I have access to, and I can say if I'm accepting or not accepting. In this case, I'm currently accepting graduate students, but not accepting undergraduates. So if you're thinking about like, all right, there's, these 10 groups that study aging, you can then search for each one of those faculty members on here and find the ones that list on here that they're currently accepting students. And that might be a more directed way to try to put your, put your seed in the ground where it's actually going to grow, not throw it at a spot where there's no spot, right? Now, with that said, sometimes faculty forget to update these things. So don't it's not a universal thing, but this exists.
So questions from any of you?
Okay, I had a question on like what percentage you feel labs are like available. So like are 50% of labs able to accept students or something like that?
I think sometimes timing matters.
Varies.
Yeah.
Semester to semester.
So I don't know. One of the reasons we created the portal was partially because we don't know.
No.
We do not know how many students want to get in labs and how many spaces are available. Each lab is like its own little kingdom. Like this isn't as organized as you might think it is across the university. So part of the reason for the portal was we honestly had no idea when it was just individual emails from students to individual faculty randomly picking up students. And especially if people are volunteering in labs, there is no documentation necessarily of that. So we're trying to get a hold on that of like how many students are applying, how many spots are open, in what labs, how often. So that's kind of a big question. In terms of how many labs are taking people, I would think about 50%. I do think it matters when you try to contact people or when you try to get into labs, because that tends to be like, I think most of us, I like to have my labs set and filled before the start of the semester. But when students think about contacting me is right after the semester starts, which is the worst possible time to contact me. I have just filled my lab with people who applied at the end of the previous semester. I interview them at the end of the semester, set the schedule, and then we start the first day, everybody's all set. So I think some of where you get no openings is partially because of timing, honestly. I don't know, are there better answers to some of that?
The other point I would make related to that is that for me, most of the students that are in my lab end up staying until they graduate, and most students graduate in May. So again, the spots are opening up when those students are graduating. Now, of course, we have students that graduate in December too, but yeah. Yeah, question in the back there?
Is typically like the second semester, is it a good opportunity to get into labs, or is it more like at the beginning of the year?
Yeah, so I mean, kind of what we were just saying about it's really before the semester is important, so that's important. Now, if you're a first year student, I will say, for me, I usually don't take first year students their first semester at UTD, and sometimes not even their second semester, mainly because I want you guys to get your academics like squared away. Like I want to make sure everything is going well. I don't, if you're, barely passing and then you come into my lab, all I'm going to do is hurt your academics, right? So I want to make sure you're like settled, you're comfortable with, being in college, all of that. It doesn't mean I don't ever take first year students. We have like the Clark programs. We have students that are already in labs before they even get here. But generally speaking, I want you guys to be settled. So.
I'll say developmental labs, some of us really need people in the summer. My lab is like hopping in the summer, and then I don't have as much for students to do in the fall and spring. I don't know if yours is this way too, but like we actually right before summer try to get a lot more students in. So at the end of the year, the same thing, we do have students that are graduating. So a lot of our students have been with us for a long time, leave in May. And then we are also trying to ramp up for the summer. So we will take students more, all else being equal, a good time to contact us is like mid or early April is when we start looking for summer positions. And that's a pretty heavy time for a lot of developmental labs.
So what y'all are saying is it really just varies based on lab, like you were saying?
Yeah, so that we don't have an answer. Yeah, anytime, no. But yeah. And I do think that right before the semester ends, like the last couple of weeks of the semester is when we start kind of looking towards the next semester, which I think is unexpected for students. They don't realize that. There's one over here.
I'll just make a quick comment about the summer for me. So I always pay my students in the summer, but that also means that I need to budget that. And so I'm actually thinking for summer, I'm looking at like January, February planning for the summer. So just, again, it's like kind of lab specific or group specific, depending on what resources are available, what we're using, and kind of how we're planning. So
yeah, and I would just suggest that you try to have your information in the portal during the registration period, because then that gives the faculty time to go in and review the portal and make decisions before the end of the semester. And you're trying to figure out your course load too. And you won't be admitted to a lab necessarily right when you're registering for classes for the next semester, but at least it gets you in there and you have lots of opportunities for faculty to review your application before the end of the semester.
I'll often ask students for a CV. Who here has a CV or curriculum vitae? Who here has ever heard of a CV or a curriculum vitae? Like a handful of you. So what it is, it's like a supersized resume. So, you know, faculty members, our CV users might be like 35, 50, I've seen 100-page resume, basically. What it allows you to do, though, is expand a little bit on, you know, instead of just like listing the jobs you've had as a single line, it's like, what were your responsibilities in those jobs? And I like that because it gives me an opportunity, like, has the student, you know, been a leader before? Have they had responsibility? I like to see those CVs. Now, when I ask for the student, I always give them information on, you know, here's what I'm looking for, here's some templates, et cetera. And I'll actually pull up a website that we have that has some examples and some templates in case you want to start on your CV.
Other questions?
Yeah, go.
Like whenever I was trying to do the research application, it said to like pick at least 4 professors or like research labs, and like are they expecting it to be personalized? Because you write like a little blurb about like what you're looking for and stuff, but are they expecting it to be personalized?
So this is a really hard issue, and this is when, as the portal was being created, we did a lot of focus groups from faculty and from students, and it's a difficult way to answer. So faculty, just like Ben said, really like the things to be focused, to be like, you want my lab. But at the same time, you're applying to multiple labs, right? So you're like, how do I do that so that it fits both? It really is a good idea to write. It doesn't need to be specific, but probably you have areas of interest, right? Like if you're interested in kids, you can apply to like 10 labs that all study kids and still be focused on them. If you're interested in pain, there's a lot of researchers that do pain, and you might specifically even within there talk about a few labs that you're interested in. We have you apply to a couple because exactly that, lots of times people aren't taking people. We don't want you to over limit what you're doing, but you do on the faculty side of it, we want people who are interested in our work. So it's a really hard balance. And I realize that on the student side, that's really difficult, right? You're like, if I'm supposed to say multiple labs, but I'm supposed to be specific, how do I do it? So I would try to find a topic area that you're interested in and talk about why you're excited about that topic area. And if you do have a couple of people you're really interested in, you could mention their labs and you have them post it. But we understand, even when you apply to like PhD programs, you're applying to lots of programs usually. We understand that one lab is not necessarily going to be your passion, and probably shouldn't be when you're an undergrad. But we still want people, again, that like are committed enough to our topic area that they're excited to be there every day. And that's not going to be true of all labs, and that's okay. So does that answer it some on why it's?
Yeah, like, because whenever I was applying to labs, I liked all of them for like different reasons, and I didn't know how to get that across without like making a list or something, or like doing separate paragraphs.
You could even do separate paragraphs. We know you're applying to multiple labs. Like we expect that. But at the same time, we want you to like what we do. So the multiple paragraphs actually fits that. That I have no problem. It's not like I feel like you're cheating on me if you apply to Melody's lab. It's horrible. I can't believe she would also like infancy. Like that's totally fine. But we just want to know you like what we're looking for. And you can like other things too. It is hard to fit in, but that would be a great way to do it, actually, a couple of paragraphs. No problem. Yeah. Go there. Yeah.
Okay, it was regarding the neuroscience labs. So is there a certain time slot that you prefer for us to be available during like the week or the day?
Oh yeah, so the question is really about availability during the day for neuroscience labs. I mean, I think most of our labs, the standard is kind of, 8 to 5, 9 to 5. But we do experiments on the weekends. We do experiments in the evenings. But for me, especially when students first get in the lab that first semester, it's just typical 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. Now, you don't have to be available all of those times, obviously. But yeah, that's when most of the people are in the lab. And then once students are, in their second, third semester, that's when maybe they're starting to work on the weekends and doing experiments that maybe go later in the day. I also wanted to mention that the size of labs varies tremendously. In neuroscience, we have labs that have 20, 25 graduates in them, and we have other labs that have 2 or 3. And so, one thing you can do is you can kind of investigate a little bit the different labs. Almost all of us have on that research labs page our own website, and we'll list the people that are currently in the labs, and you can get a sense for, how many people are typically in this person's lab. And that's important not only from a, finding an opportunity perspective, but also like, what do you want out of this experience? If you're in a lab with 25 or 30 people, like the chance that you're going to be working with one of us is probably less, because there's probably like a structure in there, right? Where there's like, you're going to be working maybe for another undergrad who's a senior, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's a different learning environment. And you can also, look at the undergrads that are currently in those labs and talk to those people and find out what their experiences are like, because it's very different. Sometimes labs will have an undergraduate that is just doing a single technique over and over, and that's fine, that's good, that's great experience. Other labs, undergraduates are running their own independent experiments, not for semester, but like as they grow into it.
Thank you. Okay, so I had a question on like, would talking with graduate students of your labs be helpful as a way to like have the graduate student recommend you to them?
Is that it? So kind of working your way into a lab through the graduate student? It can be, for sure. I mean, it depends. The person who goes through my application, so when we're about to apply, I have on my portal that my PhD students and my lab coordinator actually are the first line of defense. Like they're the first ones to go through the applications, because they are, my lab does have a hierarchy. My lab coordinator and my PhD students work with the undergrads more than I do. And so I want to make sure that the undergrads who are coming in meet the needs that they have as well. So absolutely, if you have a TA for a class and you love what that graduate student is working on and you know them, talking to them about the lab would be a good idea. I think that could work. I do think also the lab, getting to size of labs too, there's lab cultures. I feel like the students in my lab become really good friends, and you have this other group of friends, and there's this multi-tiered. You meet students who are juniors and seniors and PhD students and postdocs and master's students, and you just learn a lot about the culture of academics from that. So there is this added benefit of being in a lab in terms of learning about research culture. You learn more about UTD, like what classes you should take, what different paths are to getting to a PhD. There's just a lot more you learn in that too. I just veered off. Sure.
Yeah, sometimes it's the graduate students who will pick you up, and because they might be doing their thesis and they need help, so you might be mainly supervised by the graduate student. And you should take advantage of that because they are a little bit older and know a little bit more. So it's also a good mentorship to have.
Yeah, my lab, we kind of do like a one-on-one sort of strategy for undergraduates. So one student to one graduate student, one undergrad to one postdoc. Even me, I will take undergraduates kind of one-on-one. Or if the graduate student is like really cooking and wants another undergrad, then they'll do that. And I do the same thing. They'll look at the research portal. They'll talk to students that they've TA'd in the classes. I will say too, my lab used to be probably 75 or 80% of my lab were students that I had taught in classes. And I got to know them because those are people that went to my office hours, okay? They weren't necessarily always the most vocal people in class, but they came to office hours, so they were there like every week. I got to know those people. And then when they were like, oh, hey, do you have any lab opportunities? Like, yeah, like I know you're good, or you're a good student, you have interesting conversation, like I already do that. So that was like a really kind of, I don't know if they did it on purpose, but a clever way to like get into my laboratory. So, I would encourage you guys, a lot of students don't go to office hours, and think, even if you don't have a question, you can go to office hours and just talk, ask about careers, ask about people's research. Again, like I have the time booked on my calendar. I'm there for an hour. I'm gonna be sitting there. I'll do my own work if no students are there, but if students are there, I'll talk to you about whatever we want.
Okay, I had a question about why, I always hear that it's required for pre-med students to also have undergraduate research when you're going to be applying to med school. Or I feel like volunteering at a hospital or scribing would be a better opportunity. Do you have knowledge of why people say that you should still get undergraduate research?
So I think one answer is it's not required.
Well, it's the hidden requirement to be competitive for med school.
Maybe. I think that there are other things that people do, leadership opportunities and clubs that have nothing to do with health sciences that I think medical schools are interested in looking at. Obviously, your shadowing hours and shadowing time, your commitment to your community, your MCAT scores. But sure, research is important. Now the question is, why is research important? In my mind, the reason research is important is if you're a physician someday, you're going to have people come into your office and they're going to hand you a paper and say, I want this treatment. I just found this on the internet. And you are going to need to be able to look at that document and understand like what is good science and what is not. And medical school does not teach you that, right? They teach you how to, diagnose and treat disease, but not to understand statistics and experimental design. That's what you get from research. So for me, like I'm very happy to have pre-med students in my lab because when they're a doctor someday, I want them to be curious about the science and about the treatments that they're having. So that's my kind of perspective on it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same thing. I am a researcher, so I think research is essential. I only go to doctors who are at UT Southwestern and can read research because I think it's essential for my doctor to have that skill as well, partially because there is bad science out there. There are pharmaceutical companies trying to sell things with the doctors. If the doctors don't know research and understand it, they are much more susceptible to giving out bad treatments, even when they have fabulous training, if that training doesn't involve research. So I mean, I'm not a medical school person letting people in, but I do also have a lot of my students go into pre-med and go into medical school, and I do think it's an essential skill. Also for understanding the difficulties of research, the limitations of research. When we say, we know this because of this study, what do you actually know and what are problems with that and other things to contemplate? I do think it's just essential for knowledge to be in that field. But I'm not letting people in, I just agree with them on it. Any comments? No? Okay.
Can I say one other thing is if you are someone that is like, I want to go to graduate school, like put that on your research portal. Like if I see that in a student, like, because someone who wants to go to graduate school, like they have to have research experience. Med school, it may help you. But if you're trying to go to research to graduate school, like you absolutely have to have research experience. So if I have 10 students and 9 are pre-med and 1 says I'm one, and is not lying, okay? So be honest with yourself and with us, right? And again, like most of my lab, 95% of my lab is pre-med, totally fine. But if there is someone that is like, I want to get a PhD, and like they're going to the top of my list in terms of who I'm talking to, because I just know like that person, this is their opportunity to, continue on with their career. So, other questions? I did want to.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I did say it's a buyer's market. It's hard to get in labs, but I don't want you to be discouraged. And I think persistence actually counts a lot. I've had students that bugged me a lot before they got in my lab. I'm not saying you should necessarily, you got to balance it. Yeah, I know. But I'm like, I want you guys to be optimistic about this. I think that there's a lot to be gained from working in research laboratories or even doing these short-term working groups. I mean, it's a different type of learning and academics actually doing the things rather than just learning about it from a textbook. And I think and it's so much different than, your chemistry lab, right? These like recipes where you're just going to, actual research is like a whole different game, but it's really good to get in. I would encourage you guys to try to do it. It's hard, but it really is worth it. There's also lots and lots of external opportunities at other institutions. I'll throw that out there too, like summer opportunities, internships, etc.
Yeah.
Is there like BBS lab related to CS, like computer science?
There are computational science types of activities. You would look under cognitive neuroscience. Dr. Richard Golden, who am I forgetting? We've got some new
Right here.
coming on board too.
There you go. You just sort by computational neuroscience. There you go. Hey, look, a pain stress lab, Ben Culver.
Yes, it's only here last time. He said answer a few more questions. I was going to say a few things that left me. After you apply to the portal, I'm going to talk about that a little bit. You apply to the portal, let's say you don't hear anything. So be patient And then, you know, toward the end of the semester, you might reach out if you haven't heard from people. But then what typically happens is the faculty are going through the portal and selecting people to interview. And every faculty member handles it differently. I have interviews in my lab. And so I'll bring students in and I'll get for an interview and, you know, ask them questions and then, are you okay?
We okay?
Yeah, like,
Do you hear that?
oh, no.
Okay, okay.
Okay. Mr. Hayes.
I do that all the time. You're all good.
All right. Students sometimes worry that they have not had any research experience before. They haven't had a lab experience. We don't expect you to have it the first time you're getting into a lab. But for example, we're all looking for students who want to take initiative, who want to, you know, pick up a project and work on it, be there, be devoted, be committed, and be part of a team. Because most of our labs involve teamwork, and you have to work well with other people. So those are some of the skills that I think are really important for being in a lab. And you all may be able to add to that.
Yeah, something you said clicked in my brain too. If you get an opportunity to work in a lab, like hold on to that. Like don't, I have students sometimes that it's like they're on their third lab. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, and I think it's because they don't love the research. Listen, you don't have to love the research. Like, I don't even love my research sometimes, you know? Like, it's all good, just get the opportunity, right? If you have longevity in a lab, you're gonna get so much more out of it than if you're jumping around trying to find the perfect lab that is exactly your passion in science. Like, there's time for that. You can go to grad school, you can work as a technician, you can be a doctor in that field, but just take the opportunity, whether that's you're in a biology lab or biochemistry or like whatever research opportunity you get here, like hold on to that opportunity and work hard to keep it. And I've got to run, so thank you all.
Thank you.
That's about a little bit on the idea that the research that you're doing in undergrad doesn't need to match exactly what you want to do in grad school. If you can speak intelligently about science and research in any area, that looks good on a graduate school application or a medical school application. So some people worry about that sometimes where they're like, if you want to get in my field, you're like, well, I want to do child development, but I've only worked with college students doing, or I've only done pain research with mice. If you can still tell me what independent variables are, dependent variables, what you were studying and why, and talk about it intelligently, you can transfer that over to child development. So that idea of holding onto a lab, that is a good point. The longer you are in a lab, the more in depth you get. The more in depth you get, the better you can talk about it. That's going to extend to lots of different areas. So I think people do jump in like, oh, I need to get into the lab that does exactly what I want to do in grad school, or what the area of medicine I want to be in. That's not necessarily true. Depth of knowledge is better than breadth of knowledge. Should I do it right? Yeah.
Yes.
Knowing a lot about an area is better than knowing a little bit about multiple areas. So knowing a lot about a lab and being there and knowing it well is what's going to serve you. That looks way better on a graduate application than that you worked in 5 different labs. Working for a long time in one lab and really speaking well about it and intelligently about it, that's much, much better. So, and it's honestly a little easier to do here at UTD. Once you get into a lab, we want to keep people. So we want you to stay and keep doing more and getting more and more advanced in your work.
Yeah, completely agree. I think it's also when supervisors look at your applications, if you're applying to grad school, they would think, oh, this person has been to 3 labs. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah.
Those are good points, thanks. Anybody else have questions? Can y'all think of anything else we should add? I think we've covered.
I just think these are also lab skills are skills you learn for everything. Like what you learn, I mean, there's the whole idea that it's teamwork, that it's you working together, that you have a project. These are research, a lot of research in my field at least takes years, but the idea that you can commit to a large project, work together, you learn analytical skills, you learn people skills, you learn new knowledge and how it applies. All of that can go into your job as an accountant somewhere. Like it doesn't, these are just really good skills to learn.
You talk about longevity in the lab. In the far future, like say you graduate from UT Dallas and start going to college somewhere else, does that necessarily mean you're done working in that lab, or is it you can still work in it afterwards?
It depends. So can you keep working in the lab? If students have gotten really embedded in some of my research projects, I can't let them not keep working in the lab. I'll keep contacting them to continue on with the project if they want to. I think if you get involved, at least in my lab, your involvement in a particular project is what stays. So if the project's ongoing and you have become very instrumental in that and very involved in it, you can continue adding to it if you want to, even after you left. I have a student who's now a PhD student at UVA, and I still contact her about some of the work that we were doing because we're still working on a publication together, even though she's in her second semester at a PhD program somewhere else. If she didn't want to do it, I wouldn't make her, but she is really excited about continuing on with that. So I think it depends on your relationship with the lab and the projects and why you would do it. But if once we've trained someone, if that is a good, reliable, great student, we want to keep them involved and keep them, they then benefit the work we're doing. So we would absolutely keep people involved.
And if you do want to do that, you should tell your supervisor, right? You should initiate that.
All right, well, thank you all so much for taking time out today to be here and learn about getting involved in research, and feel free to reach out to me and the advising staff, any additional questions.